People signed up. We don't know how many will be able to join.
How many signed up, do we know?
I'm not going to tell you till afterwards.
Oh,
Enough.
It's a good number.
Enough. So welcome everyone. We're going to wait a minute to begin this. So feel free to come in, get settled. We'll give it just another minute or so. Thank you all for joining. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to the Return of Individual Results project and website. My name is Barbara Beerer. I'm the faculty director of the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center, and I welcome you all to this webinar. We look forward to the next hour together, and I'll describe it if you could just advance the slide. So this is, as I mentioned, the Return of Individual Results webinar launch. We'll be giving a little bit of an introduction to this work and how we came upon it. Then we're delighted to have Jamie Tyrone, a patient advocate, speaking about her experience with this, and then Lisa Murray introducing you to the website. After giving a short introduction, I will give the sort of background and importance of returning individual results. I think that if you're on this webinar, you appreciate it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The evolution of this work, and then remarks from Jamie, the project update that Lisa will give, and then the website demo. For all of you who are on that are waiting to see the website link, you will have that privilege after you have the introduction to the website so that you know what you're looking for and how to look at it. So we will give that at the end of this launch. I do want to ask you all to enter questions as they come up into the Q&A. As you can see, the chat is already quite robust, and it's hard for us to keep up with the chat. It's easier with this many people to focus our questions when we have time for questions at the end in the Q&A. So with that, could I have the next slide? For those of you who don't know us, the MRCT Center is a research and policy center focused on addressing the conduct, oversight, ethics, and regulatory environment for multinational, multi-site clinical trials. We're based administratively at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and affiliated with Harvard University as a joint center. Could I have the next slide? And we really have done the work to improve the global clinical trials and thinking about improving the integrity, safety, and rigor of those trials. We do the work by engaging diverse stakeholders in the research enterprise. That's academics, patient advocates, industry, nonprofits, organizations, regulatory representatives around the world to think about and define emerging issues in global clinical trials. We don't stop at developing a really refined, detailed concept of the problem, but rather try to create and implement ethical, actionable, and practical solutions. We feel that if we can lower the barriers to implementing an approach, a solution, that people will be able to try them, experiment, implement, revise, adapt, adopt, and progress in making these clinical trials better, safer, and more patient-centric. Could I have the next slide? So we're focusing today on returning individual research results. But any attempt to return or effort to return research results really has to be thought of from the very beginning of a trial, and even before that in planning. It requires respect to understand what patients and participants and healthy volunteers want to know about their research results. And in order to do it well, we really believe you have to be thinking about it from the beginning. Could I have the next click? So plain language summaries are the aggregate results from the trial at a time when the data is known and is locked, analyzed, and we know what the results of the trial are in aggregate. And we have done a lot of work on plain language summaries and the return of aggregate results to participants. And when we did that work, which really emanated from a patient who said, we're worried as researchers about sharing data with each other. What about me? What about the patients? What about the people who volunteer? We never know what happens in a trial that we've participated in. No one ever gets back to us. And we realize that's an incredibly important piece of the work, but it's not all of the work. If you give participants their aggregate summary from a trial, particularly a comparative trial, they'll say, that's interesting. What arm was I on? Which treatment did I get? How did I do? And even before that, there are other results that could be shared or should be shared with the participants from the beginning of their screening and from their time interacting with the study team. Could I have the next click? So the return of individual results really starts way before the end of the trial and continues after the trial. It starts with screening. What if you see a lab abnormality when you're screening that you really didn't anticipate? You might need to return that immediately. And similarly, it continues after the trial when there are exploratory results that you may want to return to the participant and say, this is something you might want to know. But doing this and doing this well takes planning, thought, and analysis. Could I have the next slide, please? So when I talk about individual research results, IRR, or the return of individual research results, the return of IRR, we're talking about any test or data piece, any data or test result from a research study, that's a research study, not a clinical test, that is specific to an individual, such as the study arm assignment, the lab results, X-ray results or radiography, genetic sequencing data, and other data that we can talk about. But it's not aggregate results, plain language summaries, or lay summaries that provide study participants with the overall findings of a research study. And while we're going to talk about IRR, the individual research results today, I do want to emphasize that we strongly believe that aggregate research results should be shared with participants and should be shared with the public. And we're not talking about that today, but that's not because there isn't a forceful recommendation on our part that should occur, and it should occur as a consequence of all research. Could I have the next slide? So why do we think about this? Why do we think about the importance of returning research results to the individuals? It is known, and it has been an empirical fact, that research participants consistently desire and expect to receive both individual and aggregate research results from the research studies in which they have participated. They expect it, they're surprised when they don't get it, and frankly, they don't get it more often than they do. The expectations about data transparency and ownership are evolving in society. 20 years ago, we didn't even think about this as a normal course of business. And today we think that we should think about it and need an affirmative reason not to share. Returning IRR anticipates and responds to those expectations. And the foundational ethical principles in research can and should be applied to the return of individual research results to participants, and that embodies respect for the individuals. If you cannot share, you should at a minimum explain to a participant why you cannot share and what is involved in the decision and why it's complicated. In fact, it's been shown that research participants expect their results, and when they don't receive them, not only are they surprised, but they decline or think they will decline to participate in future research. So we are losing the trust of our participant base and of our public by not, at least at a minimum, addressing this with people and explaining why we've come to this decision in this case, in this disease condition, and for this study. Could I have the next slide, please? We started working on this, believe it or not, about 8 years ago and released the first version of the IRR guidance in 2017, at the end of 2017. There we came out with a guidance, a toolkit, and principles for a return of results, and a strong case was made for the ethical imperative of returning research results to the individual. We introduced a classification of research types, which was based on the timing of the research availability, whether the research was whether the data was actionable, whether it was clinically valid, and whether it was for personal utility. And we gave a robust set of considerations for returning genetic information. That actually is an entire chapter in that guidance initiative. And we presented it really as a starting point for external stakeholders to build upon. We presented it as here's a way of thinking about individual research results and coming up with a positive plan to go forward. We knew, however, that was just the beginning. And what happened, could I have the next slide? Over the next 5 years is that people began to have experience with it and found that there were continued barriers, continued questions, continued ways of thinking about it that we really needed to think about further and really work to understand and help each other and the community at large develop further guidance and a way of thinking and acting upon this need. When we return results to participants, we've talked a little bit about aggregate research results. There's, at the end of that, people will say, what study arm was I on? What treatment did I have? So they want to know the assignment to and the results of the study arm. I was assigned to the treatment. I was assigned to the standard of care. How did they do? How did I do in that? And then the routine clinical results, which are performed in the course of research. Those are routine clinical results performed in a clinical laboratory that can be urgent or actionable, personally valuable, even though you can't do anything about it, even though you can't do something urgently or immediately or in time. You want to know the information. It will impact how you are, what choices you make, what you tell your family, how you live your life. Those are personally valuable, even if as physicians or as healthcare providers, we don't know what to do about it at this point. And then there are findings where we have no clinical implications and no known personal implications. We don't know what they mean. It's science after all, it's research. We're trying to figure this out. There are incidental findings discovered in the course of a clinical trial. You do an X-ray and you see something that you didn't expect, not what you were looking for, but what you didn't expect. And those can be of potential clinical significance or actionable. You can see a mass on X-ray. It could be nothing, it could be something. And then there are things of uncertain significance, and we don't know what it means. We don't know how to proceed. And then there are research results that are not performed in a clinical lab or the way that we generally, sort of care and treat patients. And those can be of likely or uncertain significance, of potential proprietary importance, so that a company or a laboratory is developing a new surrogate marker for a disease where there will be potential commercial value, but not until it's validated, not until it's understood. And certainly could be, if shared with inadequate explanation, may be quite concerning to somebody without anybody knowing what it actually means. And there can be genetic and genomic results that fall into this category where we don't know the significance of a change from a normal. And then there are these other results. Could you have the next click? So these go from sort of easier to harder. It's pretty easy to anticipate how to return aggregate results. It gets progressively more difficult to figure out when, how, and how can we return these results and whether we should return these results. Could I have the next slide? So here are the task force members. I'm not going to read them aloud. You can read their names here. Incredibly helpful folks that met together monthly for an hour and a half. But none of this would have come together without Lisa Murray really taking all her time to consider this. Now, Lisa is not a healthcare provider, and therefore, one of the things that I super appreciated about the way that Lisa went about this is she made sure that she could understand the results. And if she could understand it, then, as we say, the normal schleppers could. So thank you to the contributing task force members. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, who will tell the story, her story, which really helped us to ground the work in an individual experience that's so important for us to hear. Jamie?
First of all, I would really like to put an exclamation mark on Lisa's work and contribution to this. When I've read the final product, I heard the patient's voice and how she was able to translate our experience into this final product has been amazing to me, that she was able to accomplish that. So Lisa, thank you so much. So it's been amazing. I'm very honored to have been a part of this project. I will share my story with you. I've been a patient advocate for 13 years. It's been a long journey, one which started in which my voice was not heard to here we are today. And our voices are being heard. And this is so exciting to me because after all this time and effort, this to me is one of the most proudest moments that I have had as an advocate. So my story began 13 years ago. I was experiencing some neurological issues, and an opportunity presented itself to participate in a genetic study that if you knew you're at genetic risk for certain diseases, would you change your lifestyle to prevent such disease? I was looking at my risk for MS because that was an initial working diagnosis. And I thought it would be a piece to the puzzle to know if I had any genetic markers for increased risk. What I wasn't paying attention to is that part of this panel of tests, they were testing for Alzheimer's disease. Now, I was 49 at the time, 13 years from now, you guys can do that. Anyway, and it wasn't on my radar. Alzheimer's wasn't on my radar screen, even though my grandmother, great-grandmother, 2 great uncles, and my father all had succumbed to Alzheimer's disease. And I couldn't wait to get the results to find out my risk for MS. It was all done from the model of like the direct to consumer, where everything was done online. And this was an NIH funded study. And the guidelines at the time were that there was to be robust genetic counseling before, during, and after, interactive, which it wasn't, it was all done online. And so, you know how you go to download an app and you bypass the terms and agreement, you go, I want it so bad, you press the button and like, I accept. So coming to find out, I'm alone at night. My husband was working late, and my results come back, and it said that I had 2 copies of the ApoE4 allele, which puts me at that time, Duke had put it at 91% lifetime risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. No genetic counseling. Had I had the counseling and the guidelines were followed, a genetic counselor would have vetted out as to why I wanted this information, what my motivation was, what my family history was, and what would I do with this information? And none of that was given to me. So I can say it was quite the dramatic experience. I actually contacted and visited in person the PI of the study and had said that I had a lot of anxiety around this. And his answer was, you should be happy to know this information because now you can change your lifestyle to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Now we know there is no prevention or cure. We do know there are things that you can do now that can decrease risk. But at the time, that was the information that I was given. I then went to the IRB and said, I have this anxiety. And they were saying, well, you know, online, that's a way of discussing it. And it was just a horrible, horrible experience to the point where after 3 years of anxiety, my husband said to me, he said, you know what, Jamie, he says, you need to figure this out because it's really affecting us. And so I decided to go to therapy, in which I was diagnosed with PTSD. And which actually was a validation that I wasn't crazy, that, you know, this information, I was reacting to this information, abnormal information, in a normal way that was actually explained to me. I had to make a choice as to whether or not I was at a crossroads, whether or not I wanted to be alive, because I didn't, my husband, bless his heart, he's such a sweetheart. He said, "What's your biggest fear?" Now, mind you, he's 13 years older than myself. And I said that you'll have to take care of me. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll be dead by then." So he was so cute in his comment. And he was like, "I'm right, yes, he won't have to take care of me." But the bottom line is that with his support and support of a therapist, I decided to take the bright road, excuse me, and to make a difference in giving this information. The wonderful side to this story is that I did find a study, a longitudinal study that I participated in. And I have to tell you, the experience was so different than what I had previously come from. I was given information. I was treated as a human. I was not treated as a subject. I was given information all along the way. The kindness and caring that I received, I will be forever grateful to have had that opportunity to realize that research can be a positive experience. That didn't have to be what I first experienced. I have now come to the realization that as I've gone through my journey of not wanting to know, that now I want to know everything. I want to know. I want to know what the scans are showing. And it can happen very safely if it's delivered in context. And even though it may not have a clinical significance, at some point in time, it may have. So I will share with you, I ended up having a volumetric MRI done, not in a study setting, but in a clinical setting. And my results showed that I had 32% of hippocampal volume than of my normal age. And my neurologist said, "I don't know what to make of this because I don't have any data. I don't know what this means." And so, unfortunately, and I totally understand, that I was not able to get the comparative MRIs from the study because it wasn't designed that way. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I have another thing to advocate for. And that is that at some point in time, it may not have been significant, but today it's significant. And so therefore, if information is given in context, in letting us know what meaning, if it has or does not, is still important to us as research participants. And as a research participant, I now look for studies where I will be able to get information in return. And so when you look at recruitment and retainment for a research project and study, the more information or the more that you have to offer that research participant. And really, we are not participants. We are collaborators. We are partners in research. Because without us, we can't move the needle forward. And it is a gift to us if you can give us the information about ourselves. And so I just am honored to be here. It could be delivering of this information to me is part of developing trust, being transparent, and honoring us in our care and well-being.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie, both moving, personal, and I couldn't ask for a better statement for why we do the work. And thank you for doing it with us. It's just been a tremendous partnership, as you say.
It's been a phenomenal experience to the point where I don't think you guys will ever get rid of me.
And we hope not to.
No, we don't want to.
I'm yours.
Lisa, why don't you introduce the work you've been doing and the group?
Perfect. All right, let me get the slides back up. Okay, so thank you, Jamie, so much for sharing your story. As we said, we all benefited from hearing everything that you had to say throughout this project. So to switch gears, back to the project and what we've been working on. First, I'll kind of outline how we approached the update, and then we'll go over the new resources that we developed, and we'll do a little demo of the website. So as Barbara said, in the years following our first release of this guidance, there were a couple areas that stood out as what would benefit from an update. First was really focusing more on some implementation-based guidance on how to actually return results and think through all of the complexities that come along with that. And secondly, in our initial version of the guidance, sort of by design, we took a more cautious stance on what we were recommending to be returned, but now I would say we are much more strongly advocating for results to be returned. So those were kind of two of the big areas of an update, along with other areas that were expanded. So as Barbara said, we convened a task force. And again, I do want to extend my sincere gratitude for all of you working on this with me. It was a great group. In addition to the MRCT Center team, there were 10 external members. We had a pretty wide representation within that group, folks from industry, academia, IRBs, government, and then we had 3 patient advocates, including Jamie. And the goals of the group were fairly straightforward. We wanted to identify really at the end of the day, the roadblocks people were running into when they were trying to return results, and then create the resources and guidance that they need to help them overcome those roadblocks. Really, we were focusing, and all of our guidance is focused on making a plan ahead of time, making a robust plan, thinking through the different things that can come up, and so that you're better prepared during the study, a smoother process, a better patient experience, all of that. So all of that we wanted to address, while at the same time promoting the value of returning results in a thoughtful and respectful way overall to organizations. So to that end, during the task force meetings, these were some of the challenges that were identified for us to address. There was a lot of talk of a high barrier to entry, either perceived or actual, with returning results. There were lots of concerns around liability, or just a reluctance to be kind of the first one to put yourself out there and do something new. We discussed the lack of differentiation or clarity of the responsibilities between different stakeholder groups, the absence of a regulatory mandate or detailed regulatory guidance on what exactly should be returned, who should return it, all of those details. And then kind of encompassing all of that was really a difficulty in achieving buy-in throughout an organization when you're also needing to address some of these other challenges. So it sounds like a lot of challenges, and it definitely was a daunting task, but we created a lot of resources to address those challenges from multiple angles. So we spent a lot of time discussing how to get started. And within that, we have suggestions for really making it a gradual progression. We created roadmaps that clarify those stakeholder roles and which responsibilities may fall where. We reclassified the result types in a way that I think more realistically and more holistically frames the return of IRR. We wrote very robust guidance on really how to create a plan for returning IRR, and then created some specific tools for implementing that plan. And then we wrote on some topics that kind of review common concerns or common complexities that are voiced with returning results. So this is the intended audience for this work. The resources are really geared towards these 4 groups. And it is actually quite similar to our initial guidance. I think the big difference now is that we did explicitly include participants as a group that we created resources for, and we'll see a little more about that in a bit. So as Barbara said, I will share the link to the website in a bit, and I will do a live demo. But I just want to say, as I introduce the main resources that the task force developed, I'll show them first kind of where they live on the website so that you know where to find them after the webinar ends. We will start with looking at what we created for getting started, very appropriately. We address the why to get started from a high level. I think Barbara touched on a lot of those points at the beginning of the webinar. And then we also broke down the process on how to get started. So we'll dive a little more into that. So this guide is meant to outline the process and lower the barrier to entry when investigators or organizations are first thinking about returning results. We wanted it to be very approachable, but we also wanted it to be forward thinking so that at the end of the day, or I mean, at the end of a long time, a robust program is built as opposed to just a one-off attempt from a very spirited investigator. So within this, we provided considerations for running a pilot. We reviewed who to involve in planning and different methods to consider for the actual return of that information. We discussed the importance of ultimately establishing an organizational policy around IRR, and we highlight some key pieces that we think should be included in a policy like that. And then the last piece that I wanted to spend a little extra time on is this proposed progression. So this is, you can call it baby steps, you could call it starting small. We call it the proposed progression so that investigators or study teams can really learn through their experience and build upon their experience over time. We think this also makes it a less intimidating proposal to leadership, but really all too often we were hearing people's minds would jump to the most complicated situation imaginable with returning individual results. And we kind of wanted to instead start with, really even just start with what you are already doing, something like urgent results. You have to return those. So you can make sure you're doing that well, thoughtfully, in a respectful way, smooth out that process, and then move on to the next thing. So also just wanted to pause because as we review subsequent parts of this guidance, it might be overwhelming to think about all of the things that you could be returned or that you could be returning rather. And just while those are very worthwhile, as we will say, you can come back to this and remember this, that really you just need to get the ball rolling and you can do it. I believe in you that you can do it. You just got to start somewhere. So moving along from that into more of our main implementation-based resources that we have under How to Return IRR. We have Stakeholder Roadmaps, a tool for determining what to return, guidance on how to return, so it touches on subtopics of who should return, when, etc. And then we have guidance for specific types of results that we reclassified. So these are those different classifications, which Barbara already touched on, kind of the differences and the importances between the differences. We landed on these after really a lot of discussion with the task force. We thought that these made the most sense as, thinking through the different qualities of results and how they differ and how those differences are important for the plans that you will make to return results and also the decision that a participant would make to receive those results. So we thought these were broad enough to encompass those differences, but still also encompass the wide variety of the different types of tests or data that might be returned. And so I will say, this is not to say tomorrow you need to be returning all of these different types of results, but we do think that it is important to sort of broaden the scope of what is worthy of return and worthy of thinking about and planning for. And, we all heard Jamie gave a really excellent example of a result that would have been considered personally valuable at the time, but eventually became very relevant to her care. So earlier statements about starting small still stand, but I want to encourage all of you to be open-minded and ambitious about what's possible and worthwhile. So following up with this, this is our tool for determining what to return. It really walks the reader step by step through evaluating each test that you will run at each study visit. And then upon classifying each test, it will link you to additional guidance to create a plan for returning it. And we don't want to be overly prescriptive with what we're recommending, but this is a place where we do kind of push the envelope a little bit, I would say, in what we are advocating to be returned. So next is our stakeholder roadmaps. These were a product of, again, wanting to clarify the different roles and responsibilities. The task force spent a lot of time thinking through, okay, who should be involved in this planning? Who, what should this role be preparing for? Those types of questions. So each group of the intended audience has their own roadmap. And then each roadmap breaks the sort of the IRR life cycle into preparation, on study, and end of study, those 3 time periods. And then within each time period, it provides a basic overview of each role's responsibility or task, and then links to additional guidance or tools that we have on the site that relate to that task. A lot of what is linked to is in this, how to return IRR. And this is such a small snippet of a very, very long piece of guidance that we've spent a lot of time on. We tried to get as detailed as we possibly could in thinking through the practical, nitty-gritty considerations for who returns a result, how does that happen? Try to get as detailed as we could while also maintaining the nuance necessary, given that each study will be different and each group will have different priorities, different resources, different patient populations, those things. This guide covers these 4 subtopics: who should return a result, when should it be returned, how should it be returned, and then what are the different options for offering a participant to choose to receive those results. And then within this, each subsection has it's broken down by these different results classifications of data, and we provide sort of a helpful starting point where we can, and sort of pointing to where you can start with creating your plan for this piece. Following up with that, each data type classification has its own page. Helpful to define each data type and provide examples of what could be that type of data. We link to the relevant subsections in that previous guidance that relate to that data type. We provide data type specific informed consent guidance and informed consent sample language. And then we review other points relating to that data type. So maybe regulatory requirements or the importance of gathering healthcare provider contact info, or identifying sources of expertise as needed. So next up, we have our resources section, and I'll only go through a few, but I do want to highlight everything that's there. So we have tools and templates that we created, as well as resources for participants. We link to our 2017 foundational guidance documents. We also link to our projects on health literacy and returning aggregate results, as they're highly relevant to returning individual results. And then coming very soon, we have a case study library as well. So just kind of a snippet of some of these tools and templates. Like the slide says, we just wanted to create tools to help people, adopt the recommendations that we're giving around returning results in a compliant and a respectful way. So a little more details on these. I don't need to read the slide verbatim, but we have an Irb Approval Checklist that is centered around the criteria for approval. We created a healthcare provider contact form template and a IRR information sheet for participants template to help kind of guide that conversation and guide the decisions that participants are making, remind them of their options and their decisions that they made during the informed consent around receiving results. We also round up the informed consent sample language that we put together. And then we have resources for participants, which I'll get into a little more. So we cover in this section general considerations for deciding whether or not to receive results. And then we also get a little more specific on decisions around receiving genetic results. And we do link to some really fantastic external resources to that end. And then we end with some of these questions that we would encourage participants to ask about receiving results. And these They're written for participants to ask, but we do encourage and hope that study teams or organizations would either, provide these directly to participants or, draw inspiration from them to better prepare participants for these conversations or these decisions, kind of frame what would be important to them in this process and in this decision. And lastly, throughout the development of these resources, we identified different topics that maybe were foundational to IRR, or they spanned multiple areas, or they were frequently cited concerns that came up that we wanted to address. So we gave each of these a dedicated page for us to dive a little bit deeper on the topic. These are the 6 that we addressed now, and we do have a long list of other ones that we're excited to explore. Kind of on that note, to preempt some of your questions potentially and also pique your curiosity, these are some of the areas that we have highlighted for continued work for this project. We want to further our guidance on returning genetic information, and also dive into guidance specifically for biobanks and specifically for returning IRR to parents, guardians, or representatives. We're adding that case study library, as I said, and there is even more than that. So next I will jump into the demo of the website, but I did want to take a moment to say if anybody on the call wants to collaborate or has, a really good idea for something that would be worthwhile for us to tackle, please reach out. We would love to talk about it. So next is the website demo. Here's the link on the screen, and I think it will be popping up in the chat in just a couple moments. And let me move around my screen sharing. Okay. So you may be familiar with this screenshot by now. This is our website. It's live to the public. Please dive in and get your hands dirty with this. Just wanted to, I don't want to make any of you dizzy with me clicking around a website too much, just to kind of show where everything is, how you can work through this website. This is that guide on how to get started. Each of the pages will generally have these tiles at the top that kind of show you what you can find on the page. Something like this, a lot of our guidance, I would encourage you to read start to finish, but if you want to jump to a section, you can do that from the top of the page. So another thing that I wanted to take a moment to click through are these roadmaps that we talked about. So we have a roadmap for each group of the audience. As I said, they're split into these 3 time periods. You can kind of click through on the left the different responsibilities or tasks or just things to think about if you're in a certain role. And then there are links to the tools or sections of guidance if we have them related to that task. Next, how to return IRR. We have these 4 subtopics. As I said, again, you can jump to these if you would like. They start with sort of the general considerations, the general options that you might have for that piece of the plan. And then each section has these tabs for the different data type classifications, which you can click through. And as we can, as I said, we give a helpful starting point in kind of how to create that plan. Next, just to show a page that we have for our data types. This one's for urgent results. It will link to the sections in that big guide that are related to that exact type of result, and then just reviews other relevant considerations to that data type. So for example, informed consent sample language that is specific to urgent results. Next, I'll just briefly show some of our tools and templates. If it's a template, you can download it as a Word document and tailor it to the needs of your study, or there are other downloadable formats as well. And then lastly, the topics, they're all formatted a little bit differently because they're all different. But as you can see, we dive a little bit deeper on some things that we know come up and try to give a helpful starting point, kind of frame how to approach an issue like liability, for example. So that's what I have for that. I think we have a few minutes left for Q&A. I will stop sharing. And I think we can just keep it with the three of us on the screen.
We do indeed. So first of all, thank you so much. As you'll see in this incredibly long chat that I've been trying to keep up with and answer questions as they arise, everyone's really appreciative. First to Jamie for sharing your story, for making this real, for keeping it real throughout our experience together. And, it takes huge courage, both to face what you're facing personally, but then to make it available to all of us. And, what you've gone through is exactly why we do this work. The second thing, just to get rid of it, I meant no offense by saying anything about ordinary schleppers. That's the way I think of myself. Lisa, I hope you didn't, and I certainly didn't refer to participants like that, just to get it out of the way. I apologize publicly. Lisa, fantastic demonstration. And the fact that this is being credited throughout the chat as really helpful resource has to do with your vision for how this can be delivered and understandable. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Jamie, you wanted to answer something live. I have to find that again. So I wanted to give you that opportunity.
I believe the question was,
what have you learned from your story?
What did I learn from my story? It's interesting because you use the word courage, and I don't feel that I'm courageous. I feel like that this was given to me for a reason, that when I was able to flip the switch from why me to why not me? And that my whole life was kind of prepped for this moment in time, having been in the medical field, being in business development, and why not me? And so what I learned is to have confidence in the universe, that things happen for a reason, and that I now see it as a blessing versus a curse. And that this moment, this exact moment here with you today is what I live for, and my purpose in life. And that's what I've learned. And there are times where I'm like, I want to quit, but reading the chat and reading all the comments, it makes me want to continue on with the fight. And it's not really a fight. It doesn't have to be a fight. It's a collaboration. And to get research participants involved from the very beginning, as the studies are being designed and working as a partner and collaborator, it's going to be amazing, because we research participants, believe it or not, we kind of talk among ourselves. And if we have a good experience, we share that experience and we talk about it, and we can help in the process. If you tap into us and our energy, we can help in this process and make it better.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Lisa, so there's a couple of questions here that you may want to take. One is about, did you think about what the IRB should review as a component of that? That's one question. And then if we have time, how do you think about pediatrics and children in all of this?
Yeah, so in terms of IRBs, I think we're really encouraging IRBs to be a partner in this, and a partner from the beginning. We've definitely heard some success stories and seen examples of IRBs who, they developed their own policies, or they were really enthusiastic because they were looped in on the beginning when somebody wanted to do this. And so, yeah, if the work is done up front, it can actually go really well. And as we've said, it can kind of build upon itself. If an IRB, for example, has their own policy, which we do encourage them to do, have their own policy, have their own resources, they can really be partners and support other investigators, other study teams in returning results. So we do have resources specifically for IRBs, and throughout the site, we encourage them to be integral partners from the beginning with this work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And sorry, what was the other question?
The pediatrics, how do you think about children?
So this, as I said, was one of our identified areas for continued work. I think my initial thoughts are a lot of these questions do still fit into the framework of you need to plan for this ahead of time. You need to talk to your patient population and really think through what matters to them. In some instances, there is already a pathway in kind of how you would think through this, but Barbara, I don't know if you have other thoughts to answer that question as well.
So generally, we take the position that we should really get permission from the parents, guardians, or legally authorized representative to share results with anyone underage. Of course, you know, that gets more difficult as the child themselves are older, when they're 16, 17, and you're still saying, no, you got to wait till your 18th birthday to find out by yourself. For the most part, parents agree to let their children know the results. But I do think it's better practice to ask for consent from the person who can give consent before giving the result directly to the child. And I also think in certain conditions, one may want to share that result with the parent if they want to know the results before sharing it with the child, so it's not both at once. I've been once in a situation where the parent said no, and the child, who was then 16, basically said that they wished to know anyway, and I basically had to say, come back when you're 18, I won't throw it away. That's incredibly rare. But the other thing I will say is that this issue, which has come up in the chat, of people who want their results long after the trial is over, is a problem. People may or may not be able to access them. Sponsors, the pharmaceutical companies, almost universally don't have identifiable information. They have a code, they have the result, but they don't know who that code belongs to. So the investigator may have the code, may not, and that investigator may or may not be there or not. And so I do think that while we should respect the right of people, as someone said in the chat, not to open the envelope, not to find out, and that is a choice for every person to understand what they want to know when they want to know it. The when you want to know it becomes complicated, because if it's long after, you probably will have challenges getting that result. But I don't think results, with the exception of urgent medically actionable results, are something that must be shared. And we should respect people. We should give them enough time to understand what we're going to be sharing. And on that score, another question came up, just to say that, is this something that should go in the informed consent? And I sort of, just to say, I think that we give a lot of information to people at the very beginning of a trial. And sometimes people know, like Jamie knows now, she wants her results, but a lot of people don't know that. And, they don't have to decide at that moment. And it's okay to decide later. So I do think we need to be able to find a way of asking people periodically. So it's not like, I have a result, do you want to know the result? Because then you're like, oh, you've got a result, I better know that result. So it's better to ask and say, I'm going to ask you every year regardless, just to remind you you have the right, without feeling that there's a pressure. But all of this, really needs to get explored, studied, understood. People have to get comfortable with what works and doesn't work. And I have to say that, you know, the work that this team did, and it was a team, it was Lisa leading it, but really, you know, the 12 people who worked together, you know, studied together, and you know, challenged each other to come up with the right response, really is what made this not only a wonderful process, but I hope a helpful resource going forward. Do you want to make any closing comments?
I mean, you summed it up really well. I'm excited to read through all of the comments in the chat and hear more about how it's received and what else we can work on this front. It's exciting to see other people are so excited and sort of motivated about this.
And please reach out. We'll be
yes,
here.
Please reach out. Our email address is all over the website. Again, a very hearty thank you to you, Jamie. I think this project wouldn't be what it is without you, and especially this webinar today was just made so much better having you here. So thank you for being here.
It's been my absolute honor and pleasure to be part of this, and I'm just so happy. I have a huge smile on my face all day today. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for participating and for giving us the hour with you.